Good evening. You're on the Smoking Section with Steve Helfer, and sometimes known as Stephen Helfer, and I'm just getting my papers together. We have a new intro, as you may have noticed. Of course, that's the Rolling Stones playing. Now I've got a witness from their first album, the instrumental on that album, which is really good, I think. And I want to thank my cablecasters here tonight who worked on this, and Sherry set up this great file that opens the show, so at least we get off to a good start. And tonight I wanted to get my wits about me and whatnot, so I went next door and bought some snus at the convenience store there, which I think is very helpful, very much it helps one's mentality, one's mind to be a little bit clearer, think a little bit sharper, and so because we can't smoke on the show, I will be using snus, and I'm using Skoal, mint Skoal, a little more costly than I like, thanks to the high taxes imposed on tobacco products, which states have more and more come to depend on. But we've really talked a lot about that before. But in regards to snus, there was an article that I came across by a man named Rodu, who is an oral pathologist, who is a big supporter of smokeless tobacco, and he thinks that it comes with almost no health risks whatsoever, contrary to the misinformation which people are being given by their what are called public health authorities. And one of the things that he talks about in this particular article is something called, sometimes when people smoke or use smokeless tobacco, they will get a little tiny white spot in their gum or their lip, especially if they've used smokeless tobacco for long periods of time and tend to keep it in the same place in their mouth. And what Rodu points out is that while medical professionals are led to believe that this is something that is dangerous, that in fact it is merely just like a callus. If you use something, if you use your hands to use a hammer or any kind of, or if you play guitar, the tips of your fingers will be calloused. So this small white spot is almost always perfectly fine. There is no indication of any kind of illness, and one does not need to worry about that. But unfortunately, a lot of people do worry about it, and again, their doctors who are being told misinformation, what are called scare tactics in the anti-smoking movement and anti-tobacco movement, that there is really nothing to worry about. And anybody who is interested in smokeless tobacco or in these issues should definitely go to Rodu's website. I think it's called For Smokers Only, because he is encouraging people who smoke to switch to smokeless tobacco. Now, I'm not necessarily encouraging anybody to smoke to go to smokeless tobacco, but it is certainly a very nice alternative in situations where you can't smoke, and such as this show tonight. So again, he has a very good website called For Smokers Only, Rodu, and he is in some university, I think, I'm just not sure, it might be Virginia or Tennessee or one of those states. And again, he's been an oral pathologist, a medical doctor who has made it his specialty to expose the misinformation that people are being given about smokeless tobacco. Now, tomorrow there is going to be a hearing at 1010 Mass Avenue, which is where the Boston Public Health Board meets, and the meeting will be at 4 o'clock tomorrow. It will run between 4 and 6 p.m. And even though there is no public comment there, Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights will have a presence, and we will have lapel labels that will indicate that we are against this kind of paternalism and this kind of harassment of people who smoke and people who use electronic cigarettes and the businesses which depend on them. This is an imposition by public health authorities, state and city government, who always wants to expand their power. And they're now, of course, the big thing here is that someone can go to Iraq and get his leg blown off and come back here and be told, if he's the age of 20, that he can't buy a cigarette. Meantime, he'll be going to his doctor, who will be prescribing all kinds of very, very dangerous opioids for pain and psychoactive medications for mood altering and all of these kinds of things, but he won't be able to buy a cigarette or won't be able to buy some snus, such as I just bought next door. And I think it will be very good because this hearing gives Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights another venue to be present and to indicate to these petty tyrants that we are not going away, that we will be at these hearings, and that if given the opportunity, we will be able to speak perhaps to the press against this kind of thing. But in any political move or any political action, the pressure has to be kept up. It's not just you go to one hearing and then you don't go for another year and you just sit around your home and whine about how terrible the government is or how terrible anti-smokers are. You have to keep doing things and keep putting pressure on. And Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights intends to do that and to keep up an online presence and also to be there at these hearings and willing to stand up to these public health authorities and these grant-funded activists who show up and try to get children to advocate for their causes and take advantage of the children. This is another thing that is always at these hearings, is they get people who are supposedly their judgment isn't good enough to buy a package of cigarettes, yet they feel their judgment is good enough that they can parrot what they are told to parrot against tobacco and against the civil liberties of other people, namely 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who are all of a sudden going to be told, well, you can't buy cigarettes anymore, or you can't buy a cigar, you can't go into a hookah lounge, or you can't go into a store that is where they sell tobacco and where people can smoke tobacco. You have to be 21. So again, this is going to be at 1010 Mass Avenue tomorrow, 4 to 6 p.m. My guess is that the tobacco issue will be right up front at 4 o'clock, and there will be, I hope, a discussion. I hope some dissent among the board members. Who will know? We will see what will happen tomorrow, and we will be there. Nothing is a foregone conclusion, but regardless of what the board votes, the fact that there were so many people at the last hearing who spoke against it, the December 3rd hearing, and the fact that we are going to be there tomorrow, is that our resistance is not going away. And I liken it to the French resistance to the Nazi occupation during the World War. I mean, they could not liberate Paris or liberate any other large city in France. They couldn't They couldn't drive the Germans out of France, but they kept up constant resistance, a few assassinations here and there, uh, disrupting transportation, and essentially fomenting uh, uncooperativeness among the population living in France at the time. And again, that's what we hope to do. We don't expect any great battle or to be able to turn the tide, because the tide is going in one direction now. But just as the tide goes in one direction, it changes direction. So when people say, "Oh my gosh, well this is the way it's going to be," and they try to make these predictions that in 20 years no one will be smoking, well, they made those predictions 20 years ago. And during the prohibition of alcohol, or certainly with the start of prohibition, all of the proponents of prohibition, alcohol prohibition, felt that this was the way of the future, it was never going to change. And then of course another thing that we always have to recognize is that with basically a 30-year, 35-year program, I would say, of intense stigmatization of smokers, vilification of tobacco companies, escalating claims as to the deadliness of tobacco and deadliness of cigarettes, still many people enjoy tobacco and find it very helpful in coping with the many things we have to cope with in this society, such as stress and sometimes depression and sometimes anxiety. And again, tobacco is very helpful in this regard, and it's not like these other drugs, like these opioids that people are overdosing and dying on, or it's not like these psychoactive medications that no one knows what the long-term effects are, and sometimes they play with people's minds and people get suicidal or homicidal and all of these kinds of things. So tobacco is a very mild, time-tested. It's been here in the New World for 8,000 years, so it's not something that was developed in some kind of pharmaceutical laboratory in the last 20 years. It's something that mankind has been using for 8,000 years. Very time-tested. And it's also a plant that has been studied probably more than any other plant in the world. So this idea, for example, just to get on a sidetrack, that the tobacco companies somehow hid the truth from the American population or from the government is such a lie that it would make Orwell think that it just couldn't be, no one could be so bald-faced to lie like that. Again, the plant has been studied more than any other plant, and all of the bad things that they say about tobacco were being said from the early 50s by many people. So this idea that the tobacco companies hid the truth is just the biggest bald-faced lie I've ever heard in my life. And it's just another way, and I think, this is something, when you see people use hatred, use vilification to the extent that the anti-smoking movement does towards the tobacco companies, it's pathological. It really is pathological to foment that much hatred. It's very Orwellian, because in the book 1984, he always showed, like, for a particular period of time each day, there would be this photograph of this man, and the population was just instigated to exude hatred towards this person, even though they didn't even know who the person was. And this is, I guess, a tool that is used by propagandists, people who want to manipulate people's thinking, just get this hatred of the tobacco companies. And it's a very dangerous and a very ugly kind of thing to foment among the population. And of course, it's being done to a large extent towards smokers also. Not to that extent, but to a large extent. That whole group of people in this country are de-glamorized. We're supposed to be somehow not quite up to the standard of the rest of people. And unfortunately, many people internalize that, and so if they're smoking, they actually feel a little bit less than other people, whereas actually it's quite a good, tobacco is something that I think anybody who does, it's more natural to smoke than it is not to smoke. All cultures in the world, anybody who found tobacco used tobacco, and if you look at cultures where people live very, very simple and very natural lives, like the Eskimos, or like the Hottentots in the Sahara Desert, the American Indian, people in the Amazon, they all use tobacco, so it's very natural. The only reason people would not use tobacco is if they've been so propagandized and they're so fearful. So it's kind of interesting. We see people who live in a completely unnatural environment, surrounded by computers all day, in air conditioning, artificial light, and they're going to say, oh, tobacco is unnatural, I'm not going to smoke. Whereas any culture, any population living in a very, very natural environment will almost automatically use tobacco and enjoy tobacco and not have all this fear and stuff that has been instilled in them. Now, there was an interesting article on our Facebook page, I think yesterday, a column written by a student at the University of Massachusetts, and he was bringing up the fact that all of the colleges or all of the campuses of the University of Massachusetts have now banned not only smoking, but electronic cigarettes and snus. You're not supposed to use any of this. And this kind of control, he finds it ironic that at this time, when everybody is so worried about inclusion and any kind of what is called microaggression is considered to be a crime almost, that the campuses are actively promoting discrimination against smokers. You can't even smoke outside on the campus, even if you're hundreds of feet from anybody else. This is to show that it is socially unacceptable. And if you show that a habit like tobacco is socially unacceptable, by extension, the people who engage in that habit are socially unacceptable. And this student points that out, and he points also out what we've also talked about, that there's so many things people can do at the age of 18, 19, and 20, yet for some reason tobacco is being classified as beyond the pale. In most of these students are smoking pot, most of these students are drinking, most of these students are probably experimenting with things like Adderall, and many of them are being prescribed psychoactive medications by their doctors. All of these things, yet tobacco, which is this natural plant used for 8,000 years in the New World, is beyond the pale. So for some reason, to the power structure, tobacco does seem to be a threat, and a bigger threat than many of these other so-called vices. Now exactly, we'll all try to figure out exactly why they feel so threatened by the use of tobacco, but sorry about that, but we haven't really come up with that yet. But we're working on it, and I think part of it is that, as we've talked about de Tocqueville, something that is just such a daily pleasure for most people, and such a small decision to make, if the government can intrude itself into that, particularly a kind of totalitarian public health state, then where will the government stop, or what will be the province of the individual to decide for himself, rather than the state, supposedly motivated by this great public health motivation or desire. And it's also a very important thing to realize, which we don't seem to want to realize in this country, that life is not eternal, that we do die, and that no matter how much you go to the gym, and no matter what percentage of your food you buy at Whole Foods or the like, that your body will eventually give out and will die. And this is something that, again, we have an entire culture that seems to want to deny that possibility, and that where people are being encouraged to live, and their sole purpose to life seems to be avoid what are risk factors and just go on and on. And I think we need more reminders that there are more important things in life than just extending it to the absolute maximum. Of course, our medical system seems to be totally founded on the idea that extending people's lives is, as long as possible, no matter at what cost, and no matter how much pain to the individual, is worthwhile. Of course, to be fair, a lot of people are beginning to question this and realize that this is just hubris. So again, the meeting tomorrow is at 4 p.m., 1010 Massachusetts Avenue. Thanks for watching the Smoking Section.